Happy Thursday, and welcome to a new live app teardown. My name is Ariel, and if you've been here before, you know that I do this about once a month, and the live app teardown is an extension of my weekly app teardowns, where here I take apps that were submitted by you, the viewers, and at random, and do them and show you how I do my process and how I go through them and how I analyze what's good, what's bad, and what can be improved. Because ultimately, every app is just a little bit different, but the rules and the strategies and how I go about improving apps, those are usually the same. So today we're going to do that together. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A below. I look at them as I go through this. I will try to answer as many questions as I can as I go through this. If not, I'll do it at the end. And if I don't get to your question, I'll try to do it later by email or anything else. And if you want to contribute anything else or say hi, you can do that in the chat. So we'll start with what's an app teardown. If you've been here before and if you read the weekly newsletter, you know what an app teardown is. If you don't, an app teardown, like I was saying before, is my way of sizing up an app quickly. And I do that because I help a lot of developers improve their App Store presence, whether it's the App Store or Google Play. I help them tweak apps in a way that will allow them to get more downloads. It's App Store optimization, it's keyword optimization, it's screenshot optimization, and recently on the App Store side, something that I think will eventually catch momentum, it's also about privacy and installed SDKs and tracking, which is, I know, something not many people talk about, and it's probably not that big yet, but it will be, especially with Apple's push in iOS 14, and you'll be hearing more about that later. So if you haven't seen any of these, you can head on to the site after this. There's going to be a link at the end, and you can read them. I've done 30 plus at this point. We're in season number 3 right now, and I've looked at everything from streaming services like HBO Max to games to big apps, small apps, Google Play, Apple, really all of the above, and it's a great resource to learn. I do these because I also love learning hands-on. Guides are great, but they're theoretical. When you see it in action, it's a little bit better, in my opinion. So those are app teardowns. And here's the thing about ASO. And if you've talked to me at any point, whether at a conference or over email or over social media, you know that I believe that App Store optimization is part art, part science. There is a lot of data that you can use to base your actions on and base your decisions on. But at the end of the day, it's also how you make those decisions beyond the data. And so the easiest way to think about it is you try something, and if it works, you know that it works and you do it again. And if it doesn't, you don't do it again, and you move on to something else. So it's iterative, which is something I believe is always useful, but it's also a lot of trial and error. And trial and error can take time. So there's a better way to do it, or an improved way to do it. And to me, that's learning from competitors. Now, some apps don't have competitors. Some apps have a lot of competitors on the App Store and on Google Play. That means you can usually find an app that is either exactly the same or similar enough that you can learn from it. My analysis process is pretty straightforward. When I look at an app, and we'll do this live in just a few slides, I look for obvious mistakes. I apply best practices. I apply tricks. They're not black hat. They're not the kind of things that are going to get you banned. They're just things that are not usually documented, meaning Apple didn't say, do this for your App Store optimization. Just things that I learned along the way, having done this for a long time, and iterating and experimenting. Then I make assumptions about what I think is going to work. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong, but I validate it with data. When I look at competitors, I first try to figure out who we're up against, who's directly competing with the app, who isn't, but still is within range, meaning when you type in a keyword that's relevant, they come up even if they don't have the same set of functions or features. And then I try to figure out what their performance is like. And when I say performance, I mean the 2 key components in App Store optimization, and that's ratings and downloads. Downloads and ratings. Ratings and downloads. Depends on the keyword. One is more important than the other, but both are really important. Then I try to look at all the keywords they're ranking in, and that gives me a really easy way to create a benchmark or a starting point for what I want to optimize for, at least research. And then I use the ones that make the most sense. It's really that easy. The tools I'm going to be using today, there are 3 tools that I always go to for these sort of things. I start with Keyword Inspector, which is very similar to App Store or Google Play search. But in addition to showing you the results, it shows you information that is relevant, just what I was saying before, the ratings, the downloads, and some other information. So you can easily see what works and what doesn't. And then I use App Intelligence to figure out what that performance is like, and especially over time, how it's changing. And then I use competitor keywords to find all their keywords quickly so I can find those gaps that I mentioned before and see what else I can be using that might be useful. Using useful. Well, that didn't work. So let's do it live. Now, there's every time I do this, I get a ton of emails from people saying, "Do my app, do my app, do my app." I would love to do every app. It's impossible because there's just too many. We get so many submissions that it's difficult to figure out which one would be most appropriate, be most educational. So I pick them at random. I picked. I try to do three. I picked three for this one. I'll see if we can get through all three of them. Last time we barely got through two, so I'll try to go a little bit faster. But they're all random. So if I have not picked your app and you submitted it before, please submit it again. Hopefully, I'll get to it. We all know how random works. So, and if you have any questions that are related to that, you can email me and I can explain the process. Now, before I jump into this, I just wanted to mention something else that isn't really that relevant to app teardowns. But if you're already on the newsletter, the Tuesday newsletter with app teardowns, you might know that I also have a Friday newsletter with news about apps and games. I recently turned that into a podcast, which went live a month or so ago. So if you like the idea of news about apps, it's really short. It's about 10 to 20 minutes, usually 7 minutes, 8 minutes maybe. Um, and it's, well, this voice on a podcast. So you can check it out at thisweekinapps.co. Now, let's do it. No, almost. Let's do it. Let me get out of the slide deck and go into the three apps that I chose. So I want to start with a game that was submitted. Design home house renovation. Looking at this, I didn't first know that this was a game. It took me a split second, especially after I looked at just the icon. It's really polished. It's really cool. I just didn't know it was a game. But I really want to start with it because it does a lot of things right. Now, again, this was picked at random. I try to pick randomly both games and apps. Sometimes I go more apps. Sometimes I go more games. But this one is interesting. So this one is kind of a successful game on its own, and we'll look at downloads in just a little bit to establish that. But step number one is we look at the App Store page. In this case, we have an icon that is pretty polished. It says home. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but it's got a picture of a home or an illustration of a home, so I assume that's somewhat related. And then we have design home house renovation. So the keywords in this make sense to me. This is something that has to do with home, house. These are all very related, very relevant keywords. You design, you renovate. I don't love that design home house renovation sounds like just a bunch of keywords that were targeting Apple and not targeting humans. It's hard to say how relevant that is in getting a download from a view. So in some cases, some people might look at it and really not understand what's going on and just leave and go on to something else. In some cases, they may not care. They're just going to read it, and because attention spans are so fast, they're so short, I mean, they're not going to even notice what I just noticed. So when you design, I prefer myself to design or to select keywords and stitch them together in a way that sounds good to humans and to the algorithm. I know it doesn't always work, and it's not always easy, but that's usually what I aim for. And then we have a subtitle, Dream Interior Decorating Game. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but again, all these keywords they sound pretty good. I don't really have a lot to pick at this because it seemed like the keywords were chosen carefully and not just kind of guessed or stitched together by looking at competitors. But we're going to go in a little bit deeper and see what these keywords are actually worth. Before we do that, let's look at the screenshots. So keywords help the algorithm identify or associate you with specific keywords that people search intent. But once they're on the page, the keywords are gone. They're not the factor that will necessarily get you a download. That's when the screenshots come in. Screenshots and or video if you have a video. iTunes Preview doesn't show a video, so if this app has a video, we won't see it here. But in all the teardowns that I've done so far, I want to say like 1 out of maybe 20 apps actually has a video on the App Store. Google Play is totally different, and many more apps have videos. And we can talk about videos later. If anyone has questions about videos, drop them in the Q&A, which I'm keeping an eye on. So looking at these screenshots, although keywords don't actually play into the conversion, keywords do show intent. So if you know what users are looking for, you can use these keywords both in the name and the metadata, but also in the screenshots, because that's really what people are thinking when they think about this. So if I'm thinking about these keywords, design, home, house, renovation, I want to see them and I expect to see them in screenshots. And I do see them. This is pretty straightforward. And this shows me everything I want. So I like the design here. I like the look of this. I like that there are captions that are really, really clear, and also explanations in case you want to read more. I think that's more of not all people will read, will take the time. So you really want to have those short, concise, big letters on there. And this app does it. So we can be creative. I don't know what that means. I always want to be creative, but at the same time, I don't know if this app is going to allow me to be creative. I can design rooms. Okay, now we're getting a little bit more specific. I can explore and learn. I don't know what that means. And I can design homes, and I can win prizes. That's pretty cool. Everyone likes winning prizes. So even though these are pretty good, I think staying away from these sort of generic statements is really going to help, because if you think about intent, meaning you think about what the user wants to do, they don't want to be creative. They want to design a room. And so this screenshot, in my opinion, converts much better than this first screenshot. So I would actually change something like be creative to something maybe a little bit more specific that resonates with the user. And this is I wouldn't necessarily call this a mistake, but this is, I think, a problem that I've seen in many, many, many apps that are thinking really broad. They're thinking really big. I will allow you, enable you to be creative. And that's great. But ultimately, I don't think in those terms, and users don't necessarily think in those terms. Maybe that's the second driver behind trying to download this app. And so the more concise, the more specific you are, the better you're going to do with converting. And that's really one of the main goals of those screenshots. It's to drive the point home that you're going to get exactly what you want. Not some generic statement. You're going to get exactly what you want. And the visuals, they really, really help to emphasize that. So this is looking pretty good. Let's jump into the apps. Let's jump into Keyword Inspector and see what we can find for something like design home or home design or house renovation. So I'm going to open Keyword Inspector, and I'm doing this all in real life, in real time. So it's possible something is not going to work. Oh, so far, so good. Home renovation. Okay, so first thing to look at is keyword popularity. And this is updating again in real time from the App Store in the US on an iPhone. So it might take a couple of seconds. But 31 is not a bad popularity. Popularity is a score between 0 to 100. 100 means most popular, so Instagram. 0, which we don't see often. We don't see 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. We see a lot of 5s. 5s mean almost nothing. So maybe someone looked at it at some point. You want to stay away from the 5s. There are strategies where you do want to go for the 5s, but they're really advanced and really specific, hyper-specific. So I'm not going to get into them. But you want to stay away from 5s. Now, where you go on the scale between 5 to 100, it really depends on the competition, really depends on the types of keywords. Because it's a scale that's limited at 100, so it's normalized to 100, 20 and a 70 have a very different meaning, but nothing can have more than 100. So Instagram, which is 100, and Amazon, which is 100, both of those are totally different. One is for shopping, one is for social media, yet both have the same keyword popularity. So keep that in mind. And in this case, a 33 is actually pretty good. So home renovation is nice. It's in the name of the app. And is this app here? Yes, it's number 4. So we can see home and renovation. Let's look at something else, like design home. Oh, now we're looking. So 58 for keyword popularity. Much better. And here we're number 1. So the reason that this is number 1 here has to do with a few things. Thing number 1 is when we look at the keywords, what's in front is actually the most important. And so the team that thought about ASO for this app, I'm guessing here, looked at all these keyword popularities and saw that home renovation is great. So they added both home and renovation, but design home is actually much better. And that goes back to maybe why this is like this, even though grammatically it doesn't sound perfect, because a 58 popularity is really good. And to have that in the beginning of your name is really, really powerful, as we can see here, because it's number one. Now, for some reason, my estimated downloads don't work, so I'm going to reload this page, and hopefully they will start working. No. Why do they not work? This is what happens when you do stuff live. Technical difficulties. Hard refresh. We'll see if that works. And we'll take a question while we wait for this page to reload. Should screenshots for tablets mirror with value prop, or should we showcase more of the tablet UI? Asks Brett. That's a good question. I think it's difficult to actually answer this because every type of app is just a little bit different. And so if your app takes a different shape on iPad, and if it looks considerably different because the iPad affords more real estate, more visual real estate, and so you can take advantage of maybe adding more UI, adding more things that the user can interact with. In that case, I would say try to always focus on what the user wants to do, but with the iPad as a way of doing it. So forget about the iPhone, focus about how a user gets something done, not necessarily what the iPhone version does. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, you can add something to it. But I would always focus on what is the user going to get? What's in it for me? If you heard that statement before, the benefit of using this app on a tablet, meaning I'm on an iPad, I want to see what's in it for me on an iPad, or on an iPhone, I'm on an iPhone, I want to see what's in it for me on an iPhone. I don't really care what's in it for me on an iPad if I'm on an iPhone because I can't actually get it. So that's how I would approach that. Now, as I always say, always experiment. So if you think that, if you're not sure, you're not 1,000% sure, which is really hard to be, test it. So try one set of keywords for the iPad and then give it about, let's say, 3-4 weeks and see what the conversion rate is, meaning the downloads divided by the impressions or the page views in this case. And then swap those out with an update for another set of screenshots. Give that another 4 weeks or so. And if everything else is the same, meaning you're not spending more or less on advertising, or there wasn't any sort of event that triggered more traffic to your app, it should be indicative of which one is better. And if both of them are fairly similar, then it's really up to you. You're the dealer here, and it's dealer's choice. Okay, so we can go back to Keyword Inspector, and I see downloads now, so everything is fine. So here's what I look at quickly when I try to assess what's going on, and this is really the lead-in to how I do competitor benchmarking. And so first we look at popularity. This is really popular, so we want to be doing well for this, and we are in this case. Then we look at downloads. So we can quickly see, these are estimated downloads based on the last 30 days in the US. We can quickly see how other apps that are also targeting these keywords, how well they're doing. And then we can also see a very important factor here is ratings. Now, the total ratings is not exactly the factor. It's the number of new ratings, just like downloads, that is driving the decision on where to rank each app once you see the keywords in there. So there are two interesting ones here. This one, number one, is beating everyone both on downloads and on total ratings, which is great. But then number 5 here is beating number 1 on total ratings, not on total downloads. So I want to take a closer look at that because they might make a quick ascent into number 1. They can take over if they move home design or design home to the beginning of their name. So if you're Property Brothers, you can easily challenge this app. Now, a side note that is slightly less related, the problem is when you don't associate a brand with your app. So in this case, it's all keywords. It's really hard to talk about it. So word of mouth becomes a little bit more difficult. And in some situations, you can also drive traffic to your competitors. So if I want to tell my friend about this cool game to design home and home renovation, and I tell them, oh, just look for the thing that says house renovation, and they do, they might find any of these other apps that are also optimizing for the same name, and they're not exactly going to know which is which. They might ask me, or they might say, what does the icon look like? They might not, and they might just download Property Brothers and contribute to this 86,000. So something to keep in mind. If you can, you always want to have some sort of a brand. It does take away from your ability to target keywords, obviously, but in most cases, it's worth it, in my opinion. Now, let's look at, what do we want to look at? Let's look at these 5 apps and compare them. What this will allow us to do is, one, understand how their performance has changed in the last, I'm picking 30 days here because that's an easy example. And we're going to look at downloads, and we're also going to look at new ratings because that is a lot more relevant. So we have quite a few apps here that are doing fairly well. The app we're looking at is actually not the #1 app in terms of downloads, even though a few things have changed, as you can see recently. And that's good because the algorithm doesn't look all the way back into the past, not Apple at least. Google does, Apple doesn't. And so even if your app was not doing that well for the longest time, for years even, but over the last, let's say, 7 or 8 or 10 or 30 days, your app has seen a big surge in downloads or in ratings, that's going to indicate to the algorithm that it needs to rank you up a little bit higher. So it's going to do that. Now, downloads are one thing. Ratings are where things get a little bit interesting. So for the most part, they're fairly similar, but then this one app has a spike, and this one app is #1. This is our app. So the app we're looking at least. And so you can see how a big increase in ratings will push you up in ranks. And I believe that if we look at the ranks for this particular keyword over time, which will take too long to do right now, but we could, you will see something very similar where design home house renovation wasn't #1, but it became #1 fairly recently. And that would be this. The takeaway here is that if you are trying to rank for a keyword where you may be in the top 5, but you're not making #1, try to get more ratings. I'm not saying go and buy ratings. I know some people do say that. Don't do that. That can get you in trouble, especially now with Apple and all the noise that's happening around buying ratings. But incentivize your user, or not incentivize, but remind your users that they should rate your app. Use the built-in ratings pop-up and pop it up at the right time. We have a guide on how to do that. If you are interested, we'll drop that in the chat very soon so you can have it. But that's a good way to get ahead without having to get more downloads or use paid ads or anything like that. And that's already if you're in the top, but you're not #1. So now that we have a kind of an understanding of this, I'm going to jump into ASO. And I'm going to skip this and go directly into the full report so we can use filters. And so what I'm doing here is I took the top 5 results for one of the more popular keywords that I found in the app's name. And I'm going to put all of them together. So what this will do is this will go through our database of millions of keywords, and we'll find all the keywords where any of these apps are ranked right now. And we update our data every hour, so this should be as fresh as possible. Now, with that, we have a whole bunch of other useful information. We have the competitiveness, which means how difficult is it going to be for me to rank in this keyword? Popularity, how relevant is this keyword? And the number of apps that I'm competing against if I want to rank in this keyword. So we'll start by what I was saying before is stay away from 5s. I would like to stay away from 5s. So we have 600 keywords. I'm sure we can find some good ones. So we cut it down by about a half. Now I can sort by popularity and see what's going on here. Let's sort actually by the keywords that are being ranked. So 2 #1 positions, that's pretty cool. A few top 5 positions and a whole bunch of everything else. There are many ways to use this data now to turn it into more downloads. The easiest way is to say which of the keywords that I'm in the top, let's say 5 or 6 or 7, maybe max, should I be targeting and pushing? Pushing meaning I'll try to incorporate more into the name. I'll try to incorporate it more into my keyword list in App Store Connect specifically. And you can do that quickly just by looking at popularity. If popularity is good, then that should be what you focus on. Interior design, which is not mentioned in the name, maybe in the subtitle. I don't remember at this point. Yes, it is. Um, Maybe interior can come up into the name as an experiment to begin with, but it might work because this is fairly popular, interior design with a 48, and that's better than the 33 that we saw before. And so now you have the time to make these sort of minor tweaks. We can do another thing, and that is look at our competitors' ranks. Too many clicks. And find keywords where they rank where we don't, and try to figure out why. So is Pinterest really relevant for home design? I can see why. I mean, Pinterest is a great place to share the output of these sort of things. I don't know if it's really relevant for a game more so than actual home design in real life, but that's a decision that the developer can make, and that can go through some sort of an iterative experiment as well. So you can throw Pinterest or something similar to that into your keyword list and see if that helps with downloads. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, try something else. We can do the same thing for any keyword gap that we see here. Architecture, a 42 keyword, 42 popularity. That can also be useful. It's hard to tell from the outside what would be most useful just like that. And so this is really where you would want to experiment and want to try, unless you've done this before and then you know what works and what doesn't, and you can just implement it. Home improvement, popularity of 28, so we're dipping a little bit, but they're number 4. Maybe we can take over number 1. And then I can continue doing this over and over and over for all the apps. What I find more interesting is that some of these apps that have fewer keywords that are that they're ranking in actually have higher ranks. So for example, we only saw 2 number 1 rankings for design home, but for redecor we see a bunch more. Now, this can also give you an idea of what you're up against. So obviously this app is doing something, most likely iterating over as many keywords as they can because they want to see what works and what doesn't. And so now you know that you have at least one competitor that's actively doing things. And that means 1, you should keep up. And 2, you can learn from them because every experiment they run, you can immediately learn from. It's free experimentation. The benefit of competitor intelligence, I would say, or any sort of competitor research. And you can do that again and again and again until you see all the different ways, all the different opportunities here, all the gaps, and who wins in each one, and you can see what you can take over. So that's, at a nutshell, the way I see this particular app. Ooh, okay, that didn't take too long, so we might be able to do another one. The other ones that were chosen randomly are a parental control app, and I think this icon is perfect, or this Intervals Pro app. Does anyone have any preference which one I do? Because I think I'm not going to get to number 3. Where's my chat? Where's my chat? Oops, not this. Okay, I think that makes it very clear. We're doing the interval app. 1 for Kids Locks, but interval still wins. I'm going to try and do both, but let's start with this one. So I'm going to close my chat again. Again, if you have any questions, throw them into Q&A. So Intervals Pro interval timer. The name here is also pretty generic, so I don't really see a brand behind it. But at the same time, this is a little bit different. And so I think that works better than what we were looking at before. And this is also a really competitive market. I've looked at apps like this, so apps that do something very generic, a whole bunch of times over the last few months. We looked at, what did we look at? We looked at a conversion calculator, I believe, last month. And so a unit conversion calculator. So that's really the same boat. It's really difficult to get movement in those because there's just so many apps, and we'll see that in a bit. So let's do the same process. 1, we're looking at the name. So Intervals Pro, interval timer. I immediately see a no-no here, and that is repetition. So intervals and interval are really the same word for the algorithm because it depluralizes everything. And so interval and interval means that interval is there twice, and you just wasted 8 characters, if my math is correct. And so you don't want to do that in general. It doesn't really help you. It's not that if you do it, you might get a boost. You're not going to get a boost. That's kind of proven at this point. And so that's the first thing that I see that is problematic here. And that's taking away from the ability to use actual relevant keywords. And we'll get to that very, very soon. So, subtitle, we have custom hit and running workouts. These all sound great to me because I have used interval calculators or interval timers before, and I've used them mostly for all of these things. Hit, if you exercise, really requires some sort of a timer. You can do it in your head, but it's not really that easy. And so I imagine there are more interesting use cases for an interval timer, but these are probably at the top of the list. And we'll get into why that matters in a few seconds. But let's continue. So one of the other things that we see here, and that's very old school thinking, is that the name of the company is Intervals. And even though it doesn't have a lot of weight, it actually does have some weight, the name of the company, in your keyword ranks. And so that's good. Well done. Now, let's take a look at screenshots. I'm going to switch to iPhone because that's more likely where I would find an interval timer, and I think that's probably more relevant. And let's look at them. They're not as polished as the game that we saw before, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but let's look at what we're trying to say here. And I like this first slide. I think visually it can be improved a little bit, but for the most part, it sends the message. You can create custom workouts. That's really what I would imagine a large portion of people who are looking for an interval timer are actually looking for. And I just realized this, but 22 seconds kind of ties into this because an interval usually is short. So that selection is nice. I don't know if this was done on purpose or if this was done just because it fit, but I kind of like it. So we're looking at the screenshot, and even though there's no visual element behind it, so we're not seeing the app's UI, we're not seeing the app being used or anything like that, we can tell what the app does. I feel like it's screaming at me a little bit because of the colors and because of the default green and because the size of the font. So I would maybe try to polish that up a little bit, or maybe have some designer take their magic wand to it. But it does what it's supposed to do if you think about it. In theory, it just tells the user what they can expect. So if I'm looking for a way to do high-intensity interval training, can I do it? Check. If I want to do walk-run intervals, check. Spoken interval names and alerts, check. I don't know if that's something that I would actually look for, but that's a nice to have once I realize what it is. And it supports Apple Health. It can connect to one of the many other apps that I use for other things related to fitness. This is heavily focused on fitness, and this is probably, again, because this is the most popular use case for these. So overall, I think this is great. And then we dip into what you can do with the app. I have not seen many screenshots where you see both an iPhone and an Apple Watch, so I think this is cool. This is a good way to show off that there is an Apple Watch component. And so standalone Apple Watch workouts, that sounds good to me. That sounds useful. Highly flexible is where we get into this weird territory where it's a little bit too generic, in my opinion. What does flexible mean? Does it mean that I can create as many workouts as I want, or does it mean that every workout can have as many steps as I want? I know it's hard to actually take all this information and try to squeeze it into something very succinct and very short, but the more you can do that and the better they are, I think the higher you'd see your conversion. And so it's challenging, but it's worth it, in my opinion. And now let's look into everything else. So close your activity rings. If you're in the Apple ecosystem and you have an Apple Watch, you probably love closing your rings because there's just something really satisfactory in doing that. So that makes sense. I would love to see maybe rings here because that's a lot more relevant than Sunday, December 1st. But from a caption standpoint, it works. 3 interval timer types. That makes me think. I thought it was highly flexible. Why do I only have 3? Maybe 3 is all I need. Maybe I don't need more than 3 because there aren't that many options. But something about this feels a little bit awkward to me. Workout templates, that sounds good. Analyze each interval, okay, and easy to customize. So all these sound good, but there is something you can do to really continue and improve these. 3 interval timer types, what is the benefit here? This is a feature. What is the benefit? What do I get when I have 3 interval timer types? Workout templates, same thing can be said about this. What do I get when I can use a workout template? Now, you're probably saying, oh, you get a workout template, so you don't have to do it by hand. You don't have to do it from scratch. That requires me thinking, and that requires me connecting some dots. I can connect the dots, many others can connect the dots, but in some cases they won't. Maybe because a competitor already had them, change the title so it does connect the dots automatically or without me having to do it. Or maybe it's because I'm doing something else and I really don't want to think about this, and I may in my mind ask, okay, templates, like, great, but I really need it. And that can be a closing factor for me to download the app. Now, you're also saying, well, this is a free app, so why do we need to think like it's a sale? Because a download is the most friction. Paying is a totally different thing, and that happens in the app, and that's a story for later. But you want to get them to download, so you want to get them to take action. And any action is an action. Any action has friction. And so the better you can do these, the easier it will become to get people to upgrade, to download and to upgrade. And that's what you always want. So it might sound like I'm nitpicking a little bit, but that's what you have to do in order to be competitive in a way that is scalable. So overall, I think some design love could be added to these screenshots, but ultimately they're not bad. The essence behind each and every one of these is actually really on the nose. With a few minor optimizations, this can be really good. Not just good, really good. So well done. Let's take a quick question before we continue. This means that we may eventually have to change the actual name of the app along the way. So Fernando is asking, and I think this refers back to what I was saying about generic names versus brand names. If you should change the name of the app along the way, and the answer is it really depends. Again, so if you're trying to build a brand around the app, then I think from the beginning you should have that brand really established in the app. And if you don't, you should probably push it at some point. Um, if you do it later, it gives you the ability to see what would work best. So if you know that you need all the characters you can for ASO, try to come up with a really short name and something that's really simple and really to the point, and then you don't eat up all your opportunities. If it's something where you have more flexibility, maybe because there's less competition, or maybe because you don't need as many keywords to describe the functionality of the app, then you can go with a slightly longer name. But once you have that sort of insight, you can tell also if you should use the brand name at the beginning of the name or at the end of the name. And that makes a big difference when it comes to ranking, because you know who you're up against, what their downloads are like, what their ratings are like. And so you know how optimized you need to be. Now, it's always ideal to be as optimized as possible. And so you don't really want to think, should I optimize less because I can? That sounds kind of backwards, and you don't really want to do it. But it's your brand name. So that's the one place where you can make an exception and try to optimize less. Another question from Brett, who's saying this app storefront defaults to tablet and not phone. Is this a smart move? I am not sure. I think ultimately people don't really look for apps on iTunes Preview or App Store Preview. They look for apps on their devices, and so you want to do what the device does. This one also doesn't show a video, and so if you look at this, you would say, why do I need a video? And the answer is to show off your app, and that you would also see on the device. So I would ignore this. This is great for me to show you what the metadata looks like, but really you want to optimize for what's on the phone. And side note, because we're optimizing for what's on the phone, we have privacy labels now in App Store Connect. And I've written about these in, I think, the last 3 or 4 teardowns. I think eventually, given time, enough time, these will become more and more important. Just like people look at the number of ratings, just like people look at the screenshots, they look at the icon, they look at the name. They will also look at, what is this app going to do with me? Is it going to take all my data, or is it going to just kind of do what they're supposed to do in order to build a better product? I think this will become important because ultimately people are getting more informed about data tracking. And while many data tracking is not necessarily bad in any way, shape, or form, in my opinion, it could be in some cases, but normally it isn't. And so if you go through the App Store right now, you'll see a bunch of apps that are tracking data about you, usage, for example. That's really useful if you're trying to improve your product. And those of you who do this know that the more you know about your users' behavior, the more you can custom tailor the app to do exactly what they want, so they don't have to mess around with it too much, and they get exactly that perfect amount of value. But if you don't track that, you're really missing out, and so the end user is going to suffer. But in some cases, there are apps that take all that data and sell it, and you never know where that's going to end up. And I think Apple is trying to push for transparency. the labels don't do a good enough job right now, and I've said that multiple times, but they will. I really don't see any reason why they won't. And so I think ultimately the kinds of things that you run inside your app, the SDKs that you use, and the sort of things that they collect will become important and will become a deciding factor whether to download your app or a competitor's. Because ultimately, there's always another app that's trying to steal that download. And if you keep that in mind, that's how you advance. So, okay, continuing into this. So let's look at interval timers. Going back into Keyword Inspector, I'm going to look for, let's say, interval timer, because that's an easy one. Nope, here. Who can guess the popularity? I'm going to guess 60s. Oh, 55. Okay, I was close. So let's see. The app we're looking at is number 6 for this keyword. And not surprisingly, the app that's number 1 has interval timer, the first thing in its name. So we can see how important it is to shift the keywords that you most want to focus on to the front of the app's name. Now, potentially, Intervals Pro might be a higher popularity keyword. I doubt it, but I'm going to check just so I don't. No. So it's 25. So right now, Intervals Pro, which is the name of the app, the brand of the app, even though it sounds generic, is the first thing. But if the developer, who is hopefully listening, flips Interval Timer and Intervals Pro, that can be really beneficial because let's go back to Interval Timer. Because on the downloads front, it is kind of far, but it's not that far. So I've seen things like that happen before. On the ratings front, it's also not the same, but it's also not that far. So switching the name can definitely increase it, certainly above these guys. Certainly, I would say even into this range. Because if you look at Interval Timer Plus Plus, that's got only 6.7 thousand downloads according to these estimates, and this is 4.4, so it's really not that far. If you look at the ratings too, 12 and 15, again, not too far. So a minor tweak for this app can get them into probably the top 5. I don't know exactly where it will sit. It will probably be somewhere here in the 2 to 4 range. That's my guess, and that's only a guess, so don't hold me to it. But I think that's what's going to happen, and I think that's going to happen relatively quickly if there is a consistent stream of ratings. So let's do the same thing we did before and take a look at that. And this is number 6, so it's not going to get counted. We're going to add it. Now, if you're looking at all these tools and you're wondering if you can get access to them, the answer is yes. These are all available to all of our members. And in fact, you might have even noticed before, there's a discount code that I'm going to be including at the end of this webinar. So stick around if you want a discount, and you can upgrade to have all these tools for a discount. I said discount a lot of times, but that's because there is a discount code. So, okay, quickly, we can see that we forgot to add Intervals Pro. So let's add that quick. And this data is for the last 30 days. This is in the US, and these are all estimates. So we're going to look at what we have here, and these numbers we just saw. So they're nothing new, and we can see where they stand in terms of downloads, not in terms of actual position for that keyword. And you can see that it's just slightly bit different. It's not exactly the same. This app was a lot higher. This app was lower. And so downloads don't directly affect this. But let's look at new ratings. Now things look a little bit different. So we can see what's going on here. And if we look at downloads, which are pretty cyclical, I would say this is a weekday. Tuesdays are really good for interval timers. Who knew? Let's take a look at ratings. And let's see if they mimic this. Okay, so here we can easily see that even though the downloads are fairly similar, this app, what is this app? Interval Timer, something, is getting more ratings. And that's likely because the way they ask for ratings is more optimized for their user base. So maybe they ask at the right moment, or maybe they ask more aggressively, or maybe they ask less aggressively. I don't know this app specifically, so I can't tell you, but it's all about how you ask. How and when, And that's what's going to get you to that point, because they all have downloads. They have a good enough amount of downloads that should continue to bring more ratings. What is green? Green is interval timer. So again, we can see that a little push in ratings has pushed this app to be number 1, which it may not have been if this red app would have not allowed it to do this. And so if you are thinking, what should I do with ratings? The answer is, look at your competitors and if they're trying to spike them. And if they are, you also need to spike on the same day or around the same time so you stay ahead of the curve. And I suspect that because this trend has ended, red app, which is also red icon, is going to ascend to that number 1 position. So that's a really big opportunity for Intervals Pro to get there as well. A little bit more ratings, flip the keywords, and boom, magic. And we saw how popular this is. 55 popularity is really popular. We saw 30s before, and I was happy about them. Even 20s, I would be happy about in some cases. And so this is, I would say, a very low-hanging fruit at this point. Let's take a look at the keywords, because this will be even more interesting than what we saw before with the game. And we'll skip directly into the report, which is loading. Okay, and we got some data. So this is going to be interesting. Let's rule out all the 5s because we already know why we want to do that. They're less important, and we'll stick to 11 because that got selected and it was easy. And we have 216 keywords across all these apps that are popular enough that we should care about them. And let's see. We'll take the number 1 app right now, and we'll find all the places where it's ranked at the top. And those are the places we want to be ranked at the top. So, for example, this keyword, all these keywords were actually not even close. I mean, look at this. 16, 10, 4, 6, 23, 18. So there are some very obvious issues that we can work on over here. So we know that these are competitive because we can see this. We can pick the one that's least competitive and most popular and try to optimize for it. Circuit training, timer for workouts. We have workouts and timer in the name, so that's already good. Circuit training, not that popular, so I wouldn't include it in the name, but that's something that I would definitely throw into the keyword list. Interval training, it's less popular than I would expect for an interval timer where the popularity is 55. So learn something new. Exercise timer, on the other hand, is a lot more interesting. So let's see if we have exercise in here. We do not have exercise in here. Okay, another really quick way to get this, and that's flip these. Even though we have duplication, we can worry about duplication later, but throw exercise in here. And for exercise, you can probably rank really quickly. So for exercise timer, we currently rank, nope, that's not what I want to do. Do I want to do this? Yes. We rank 10 for a 29 popularity. So 29 is pretty good. 10 is pretty bad. All these apps are doing the same thing. I would say that's kind of a no-brainer for me. If you can't find a way to stick it into the app's name, try to put it into the subtitle. If that doesn't work, put it in the keyword list, which it probably exists in the keyword list, if I had to guess. But I would put it in the name. And then I can continue to go through all of these. So we have hit timer, interval, we have all these names. But something like stopwatch, I did not think that could be relevant. But that could be relevant. We're talking 4 and 70. Not only that, none of the competitors are actually doing anything around it. So if you're looking at this, this is an opportunity to me. A bunch of these are actually opportunities the way I would think about it. And that's the kind of thing that you can learn from these. A tablet timer is really similar to hit. That's another another very similar routine. I don't know what this is. And you can go through all of these and find them. And then we can do this for all the other apps. So we looked at this app before, and this app is doing pretty well. Take all of its keywords again. So circuit seems to be doing pretty well. 27, so it's not amazing, but it's also pretty good. And we can see, as we go on and on and on, we can see what works. And so once we have all of those, what I would do, so next step, I didn't really talk about the next step from this, but what I would do is actually take all these keywords, and if my app is already in here, I would track them. And when I track them, then I get to see all the trends. So I can see the historical data, and I can see they're updating their data, updated in almost real time. We update our data every hour. And so we can see how that changes. And as you make changes to your app, you can easily see how they're impacting all those ranks together. And that's where it becomes interesting, because then you can also look at the number of page views and you can compare them to your downloads, and you can see if your conversion rate went up, which is always the goal. We didn't get to app number 3. I kind of figured this would happen, but this is pretty much my process. We looked at 2 apps that are doing a good job, and I think that even apps that are doing a good job shouldn't sit on their laurels just because other apps are going to try and outdo their jobs. You're all trying to outdo your competitors, and they're trying to outdo you. So you have to keep thinking, what is the next move, and think 1 or 2 or 3 moves ahead. And that's always to see what's happening and eclipse it. And in this case, it means really micro optimizations to keywords, and looking specifically at how an interval timer is used, as opposed to just optimizing for an interval timer. So hit, tab out, all these other things that you would need a timer for, and going back to intent. And the same thing with the game. You have micro optimizations or smaller optimizations that can give you those pushes that you need. And seeing the data, what we saw about ratings, what we saw about downloads, and what we saw about popularity and competitiveness, can really give you that sort of idea of what should I do next. So in the case of this app, I would flip the name. In the case of the game before, we also had a few options for what to do with the screenshots, and that's how you get ahead. And keep experimenting. That's really it. So that's it for the app teardown. This is the second one that we did. The first one we also did. I don't know where I was going with that one. And all this is going to be recorded and is going to be available. So if these are your apps or you missed a note and you want to come back to it, we'll send you a recording later today. I'll take as many questions as I can. I think we have a couple of minutes. So if you have any questions, now is really the only time to ask them. And then we'll be doing this again in just about a month in May. So if your app didn't get picked, and if you want to see me do this with other apps and potentially other platforms, come back in a month. We'll send you a link about that. I also have an interview later this month that I will share more information on later. So back to questions. Michael's asking for a word game. What type of keywords can I use? There's nothing specific to search for except word game. Can I use other games it is similar to? I've actually looked at word games before, and I have looked at a bunch of different word games across both Apple and Google. And so this is an interesting question. It is pretty generic and it is pretty tough. But if you think about word games, they're not just word games, they're word puzzles. And if you try to expand a little bit beyond that, you can think about what sort of other ideas would tie back into a word game. And so it depends on the game itself and the kind of things that it does with words, but you can use those very specifically. Now, you'll probably get to a point where as you look at keywords, the popularity is going to drop significantly, and you might even end up with 5s. At that point, that's really the only point where you want to be okay with accepting a 5 and use it as a long tail keyword, meaning one that is probably going to get you a lot of coverage. You'll rank number 1 or number 2 for a whole bunch of very different keywords that are number 5s. But on its own, it's not going to do enough. So you have to be ranking in 10 or 15 or 30 of those to see some sort of movement. I would not say that's the first thing I would do, but that's definitely in the arsenal of tools that you can use. The next question is, should you try to compete with the big guys, Peloton, for example, or the little guys, Treadmill TV, if you have similar products? The easy answer is neither. I think that on the App Store, you're really competing with yourself at the end of the day. So if your app looks good and your app does what it's supposed to, that's step number 1. And then if your app is targeting keywords that you can attain, meaning if a competitor, whether big or small or medium, has way more downloads than you or way more ratings, and you can't compete with them. And so you want to go for what is possible. It's possible that Peloton is going to optimize for, or not even optimize, because they don't optimize, they're just going to appear in some keywords. So even though it's Peloton, you probably could outrank them in some keywords if they don't optimize. Whereas the smaller guys might work very hard to optimize, just not have the download. So they might do very well for a smaller keyword in which you will have a very difficult time competing for. So I would say look at the data and see where your app fits based on, again, the number of ratings that you have or can get, the number of downloads that you have or expect to have, and also the number of apps that are competing for that keyword. Next day, I have an app. Some day ago, my app achieved 3,000 install daily, now 200 and 300. How can I do it better? That's a very open-ended question. Hopefully, everything you learned today will enable you to do it better, but focusing on App Store optimization and iteratively updating it is probably the way to go. Now, if you're starting from something like this where the question is, what do I do, as opposed to how do I micro-optimize my keyword list, or if you don't know how to do all of this and you're really at the beginning of this journey called App Store optimization, we have a bunch of guides that I wrote over the last year that take you from kind of zero to something. And then once you have that sort of fundamental understanding of what are even the techniques, then you can go in, and then maybe some of the things that I taught today would be more applicable. They might sound a little bit too advanced for some, I understand. So I would say definitely go to those guides and get started. There is the checklist that we start with, and then there are guides that scale you up as you learn more about the tactics and techniques, all the way up to the very advanced and the tricks, as I call them before. So I would highly recommend doing that. Now, here's the thing. I know some people have emailed me before and said that I want to succeed on the App Store, but I don't want to take the time to learn ASO. The answer to that is go to someone who did take the time to learn ASO. That's really the only answer I have. I know it sounds silly, but ultimately, if you are not willing to put in the time, you should be willing to put something towards that. So pay someone to do it. That's really the only way to move forward, or pay for ads. But paying for ads also takes knowledge and wisdom. So that's that. Next question from Derek. Do you recommend optimizing screenshot first, page view to install conversion rate, prior to optimizing your keywords for volume? That's a chicken and egg type situation. So you're thinking, if I get all this traffic, but my screenshots are not doing the best they can do, I'm just losing traffic. Versus if I don't worry about traffic and first optimize my screenshots and know that I have the best ones, then when I turn on keyword optimization, I'll win more. And theoretically, that's the case. In real life, that's not the case, because when you're not optimizing your keywords and when discovery is not the number one priority, someone else is. And so competing with them later is going to be much more difficult. You also have to keep in mind that people continue to come to your app. And so you're not going to be in a situation where you have seen a user and you lost a user because your screenshots were not good, but can't get a new user in their place. And so to me, I used to think that way. I used to think, first, let's start at the bottom of the funnel and climb up. That has proven, in my own experience, to be kind of a waste of time. And so if you can do both at the same time, but if you can't, start at the top and just make sure that people come to your app. Because even if your conversion rate, let's say, is 10%, and you think you can improve it to 15%, on 100 people that come to see your app, you will get 10 downloads. And if you manage to, let's say, quadruple that, you'll also quadruple the number of downloads. And that's good, because that means your bottom line is going to be happier. It's not going to be the most optimized bottom line, but it's going to be happier. And I think that's what I would optimize for. Next, is there a way in Appfigures to know if an app was downloaded because the user has seen an ad? Not exactly. And so it becomes very difficult. Attribution, which is how you would know if someone downloaded the app from an ad or not, is not something that the App Store builds in. Google does a better job at it. Apple gives you something that doesn't always work. And so usually companies use third parties to do that. And so the relationship is a lot harder to estimate at that level. There's some estimates out there. They're mostly wrong. And when it gets to estimating, we have a philosophy where if we can deliver something that is amazingly useful, we would rather not deliver it at all, because the opposite of very useful is immediately misleading. And when it comes to money, and when it comes to effort, and when it comes to decision making, misleading is the last word that I want associated with the data we provide. And so that's why we don't do, we try not to do that. Once we find a way, we'll be able to do it. Thank you for there's a comment about me updating my Chrome. I will remember to do that later. Thanks for the reminder. And then screenshot keyword count for optimizing. I believe the question is how many keywords or how many screenshots? No. Screenshots keyword count for optimizing. Can you clarify that? I'm not entirely sure what that means. We'll go with that. And then the last question I see here is, should I use Appfigures versus App Store Connect Analytics? I'm not going to answer this one, because if you've used Appfigures before, you know that there's really no reason to think of App Store Connect Analytics once you use us. And if you haven't tried us, there's a free trial, so you can give us a try and see that for yourself. And these are all the questions I have, minus the clarification from Fernando. So if you can clarify, great. Oh, I think there's a clarification. I mean, whatever we write on screenshot count for optimization. Okay, I think I understand this better. So the question is, how much should you write on a screenshot for it to convert better? My way of thinking about it, and that's what I have in our guide for how to do screenshots, is really 3 to 5 words max. Sometimes you can't fit it in 3 to 5 words. Sometimes it's a little bit too much. So find a way that works, but that's really what I aim for. Now, we've seen keywords today, or we've seen captions today that had 2 words, really big, not very actionable, with a subtitle that was more actionable. That can work in some cases. Definitely test it. That's where I would go with it. But I would always go for just the one caption, 3 to 5 words. Make it as actionable as possible, meaning actionable in a sense that always drive them to say, okay, I want this app. You can even go as far as saying, download this app today. I've seen that, and we've covered that in some of the teardowns. I think Todoist does this, which I think is really useful. So, yep, that's what I would go for. 3 to 5, and continue from there. You can, of course, have 3 to 6, 3 to 7 if you have to. Try not to. Oh, more questions are coming in. Okay, well, I'll take a few more questions, and then we'll end this. So what's the best way before upgrading to evaluate which competitors you should choose as premium competitors? I believe that is talking about us and our platform, so Appfigures specifically. When you add a competitor, you will see that, first of all, when you enable Grow, before you even look at competitors, you will get all the data in Keyword Inspector. And so you can quickly see the last 30 days data for them for that particular country without tracking them. That's a great way to know who are your real competitors. And then from there, you can easily track them. Also, we allow swapping. And so if you unlock a competitor, you can throw them away and get a new one once every month. And so you're not locked in once you unlock the single competitor. That feels terrible. We thought about that a lot when we first designed the system. More questions. So does Appfigures show what keyword screenshots we change so we can see the change over time? Where do we find this? Yes and no, and somewhere in the middle. That's something we're working on. We have all the data, and you can see it in the panel. So if you open an app panel, you can see all the changes that happened. But we don't show you that with a lot of detail. So we don't add any more intelligence or insight on top of it. That's coming in a new report that we're working on and will be available hopefully very soon. We're doing a lot of work around both adding intelligence and insights to the reports we already have, and also adding new reports that will give you more insight into what you should do and what you could do better. Think about the teardown process that I've walked through today, or any of my my written teardowns, but in a report that you can run on your app or in a competitor, kind of automatically. That's going to be fun. And then last question I see on this list is captions on top or bottom. What is better? Top seems to be in vogue. So I have seen both. Our app actually has both. We have some on top, some on the bottom. I actually cover this in one of the recent teardowns because I saw an app that only had it on the bottom. I think the easy answer is because they're actionable, because the idea is to drive some sort of the action should be a download. You want to drive the download, they should be on top, because if you look at your iPhone, the screenshot is not always completely visible. And also, even if it is completely visible, people tend to not look down. So if you start it at the top, keep it at the top. If it's at the bottom, keep it at the bottom. There's only one tiny nuance to this, and that is it really depends on the screenshot or the actual UI that you're showing there. If you're showing something that's so amazingly engaging and enticing, maybe it's a very special feature, maybe it's a very unique feature that the app has, or maybe it's something that you know based on reading reviews and talking to your users that everyone just wants, not even likes, just wants. So that can be first, because if they look at it and immediately associate it with something positive, it's better than words because they don't have to read it. The chances of that happening are that they're smaller from what I've seen, and so pick those carefully. Again, test it. So if you think you have that sort of thing, go for it. Put it on the App Store, give it 3 to 4 weeks, see the conversion rate, and then take it off another 3 to 4 weeks, see the conversion rate. I usually go for 28 days because that includes the same number of weekends. And most apps have cyclicality between weekdays and weekends. Games tend to be more popular on weekends. Business apps tend to be more popular on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And so as long as you have the same number of actual days of week, so the same number of Thursdays, same number of Saturdays, you should have a good enough understanding of what's happening. If you're in Google Play, you can actually test this, do a proper A/B test. And so if you are on Google Play, please A/B test this legitimately. On the App Store, you can't. And I'm not a firm believer in testing outside of the App Store for the App Store. So I say just test on the App Store. And that's it. So this is all I have for you today. We're way over time, as always. Let me take a look at the chat quickly and see if there's anything interesting that I should look at. Does not look like it. Kind of looks like Frank is taking care of business. Thank you, Frank. Frank is part of the Appfigures team. In case you were wondering, he's the one behind the scenes who's making all of this happen. That's it for me. Thank you for joining us, guys. See you all later.